The cabbages lately have just been gorgeous. Look at this cabbage. I got this today. I haven't done fermenting in a year or so. I kind of took the year off, and I thought, well, let's do it today. Let's make some sauerkraut. The first thing we'll do is get rid of these outer leaves. They're a little dusty, a little manky. There are ones inside. These ones, you can see you get down to a layer where there's a little bit of moisture. I don't want that blackness. When you're fermenting, you want your vegetables really to be nice and fresh. You don't want any soft spots or anything that might look a little dodgy, like it's already started to rot, because you want something that is nice, clean, you know you're going to get a good ferment on. So now we're down to these wet leaves. I like the looks of them. I'm going to save a couple of those. These ones I'm going to put aside, and we will use them later. So now we have our head of cabbage. I'm going to cut it in half through the middle. And then cut that into quarters. That's going to expose the core of the cabbage, and you want to cut that out just on a diagonal. And that also goes in your trash. So there we have our 4 quarters of cabbage. And now we just need to slice them to whatever thickness we want. I like it pretty thin. That's pretty long, though. So you can always make them shorter if it's easier and they're not so tall. What happens when you make sauerkraut is that you're creating, first with salt and then later with lactic acid, an environment that is very encouraging of good bacteria, of lactobacilli that you want working on your sauerkraut, and it discourages the growth of bad bacteria, botulism, and other nasty things like that. What's really important, aside from working with vegetables that are really fresh looking and have show no sign of rot, is to work very clean. Working with nice hot soapy water would be good. You could use a sanitizing wipe. If you had super strong vodka, you might be able to use that as well. But you've got to do something to work clean. So everything that you'll see today, I have already sanitized. So I know that I'm minimizing my chances of having anything go wrong with my ferment. If you have a food processor, you can use the slicing disc. That's the one with the single blade to shred your cabbage as well. And that's it. Much easier than using a knife. Maybe not as satisfying for somebody who likes cutting things, but it works really well. One place you can use the shredding disc is if you want to add something like carrots to your kraut, which I do. So I've attached the shredding disc. Oh, got to plug it in. And so I just bought what are called, by the store I bought these at, long red peppers. I'm going to just get one, cut it in half. I just want to see what hot means to the store. And the answer is not overly hot. I'm going to take out the ribs and the seeds just so the heat is a little bit under control. These really aren't hot, but those often can be. So I'm going to cut those out and then slice the chilies. Almost like filleting a fish, you can kind of slide your blade right underneath. You might get a little bit of the pepper, but you can always get that back. And then I am going to be super careful about touching my face and my eyes and other parts after that. This one has a little bit of seed around it, so we'll get a better idea. Oh yeah, there's a little heat there. A modest amount of heat. So I will cut up the rest of these. I think I'll use them all. I'll cut up the rest of these, and then we will be ready to assemble the kraut elements and get it salted. Okay, it's math time. I've got all of my chopped ingredients. I have the cabbage. I'm going to put that into this bowl on a scale. I add the cabbage. I add the carrots. The chili peppers. I left a few seeds in. I think it's a pretty mild pepper, so I want a little bit of spice, and the seeds will give me that. And that gives us a reading of 1.853 kilograms, 1,854. We always add salt by weight as a percentage of the total mass of this. So in the summer, when generally things are more hospitable to bacterial growth, you want to add a little more salt to make it less hospitable. In the winter, which inhibits bacterial growth, you want to keep your salt level a little bit lower too, just to make sure that you can develop enough good bacteria. So that means we want to be between 2 and 2.5%. I think I'm going to go like 2.3 because we're not super hot or super cold. We're kind of in the middle. So we need 2.3% of 1,854. Okay, Google, what is 2.3% of 1,854?
The answer is 42.642.
Thanks. 42.642. This scale will never get to that kind of decimal range, so we will go to 43, just to be on the safe side. Put my bowl on, hit the 0 button, and now I just want to get to 43. 43. As for the salt I'm using pickling salt, which says right on it contains no additives. Because that's important. If you're using table salt that has iodine in it, or Morton's kosher salt, which has an anti-caking agent, those could inhibit the ferment. So you want to try to avoid those. Pickling salt with no additives. Diamond Crystal kosher salt has no additives. Most sea salt doesn't. Maldon salt, if you're rich and fancy, will all be good. But stay away from the iodized table salt or the Morton's kosher salt. I think Windsor kosher salt as well in Canada, because they're owned by the same company, also has the anti-caking additive, but the pickling salt doesn't. So we have our salt, 43 grams. We have our vegetables to ferment, and I'm just going to sprinkle these around it. This looks like a massive amount of vegetables, and what happens is as the salt works in and starts creating a brine from the liquid inside the vegetables, this mass will reduce. It'll probably be half the size it is when we're done. So I take this now, and I'm just going to lightly blend it in. Try not to spill anything. At least, of course, the counter has been sterilized, so I don't feel at all apprehensive about picking stuff up off of it. I sanitized it minutes before we started. So I'm going to give this a light toss first. Nothing more than just getting everything blended, getting the salt hopefully in contact with as much of the vegetables as possible. We can also, it gives us a chance to look and see where we can break bigger things up, because they inevitably sneak through. You can wear gloves if you want, especially if you're using hotter chilies than I am. It might be advisable, or if you just feel like that kind of level of sanitation is required. Oddly, for someone who said that, clean, clean, clean everything and work really clean, the hands doesn't really bother me. It seems like it's a thing that's come about lately, but a lot of people for a long time didn't wear gloves when they made fermented things, which have been around a lot longer than latex or nitrile gloves. Okay, there's a little bit of moisture starting to appear, which is great. Salt is starting to do its job. I want to just gently let it go for about 5 minutes and then get to a little bit more vigorous handling of it to release even more of the brine. So why don't we take 5? We'll let this sit. We'll come back and we will see how we make this form even more brine more quickly. See you then. Okay, it's been 5 minutes and there's definitely a little bit more moisture you can see on the surface of the vegetables. Not a lot of change, but a little bit of change. One more thing I wanted to say about salt is make sure that when you're doing this, you are doing it by weight rather than volume. Pickling salt crystals are a very, very different size from table salt crystals. They're very different size from either Morton or Diamond Crystal crystals. And as a result, the same mass of salt will take up a very, very different volume. So weighing it is the only way to know that you're getting the correct amount, because it can be wildly different if you're doing tablespoons or cups or whatever. So now what we need to do is just basically beat the crap out of the vegetables. And you can do this a few ways. If you have a wooden spoon or a potato masher, you can do that. I have this thing called a pickle pounder that kind of works. You just keep hitting and folding, trying not to fling everything everywhere. You can also, quite frankly, it's sometimes easier just to use your hands to squeeze and punch It's very therapeutic. If you have a deep bowl, you can really, this bowl is kind of wide and shallow and flings things. But if you have a deeper bowl, you can get a little more medieval. You're just trying to break down the cells in all the vegetables and get them to release the water that they hold within. It's the water that comes out, mixes with the salt. The result is the brine. And as I said before, that is initially too salty for bad bacteria to grow in, but it's the perfect saltiness for good bacteria to grow in. And those good bacteria go in and they consume parts of the cabbage and the vegetables, and their output of that, their waste product, is CO2 and lactic acid. And the lactic acid continues making a inhospitable environment for bad bacteria and also gives it that funky taste. A lot of what you have, if you have a kosher dill pickle or naturally fermented sauerkraut as opposed to wine sauerkraut, is you get that funky, and what that taste is lactic acid. Okay, so things are starting to break down. Definitely moisture. And you can go with this for, 7-10 minutes. You can get a lot of your anger out. You can imagine people whose heads you're crushing. If you want to punch it, this bowl's too shallow, I can't punch it because things will just go flying everywhere. Rip and tear, rip and tear. Very therapeutic, and I highly recommend it if you need that kind of therapy. But if you can't do that, if your hands won't let you, there is another way to do that. So let's take a look at that right now. But first, look at that. See, that cabbage is getting all nice and wet, nice and soft. Well, not soft, but softer. And beaten up, and the volume already. Remember, that was mounded before, and now it's below the level. So let's take a look at a different way to do this that involves a lot less hand strength and hand work. If you happen to have a stand mixer with a dough hook attachment, you can also use this to knead your cabbage, just like you would knead dough. I'm not going to put all of this in because it's still pretty big, but I will load up the bowl with a bunch of the cabbage. That should be good for now. And you want to run it just on stir, which is the lowest setting possible. Raise your bowl first, works better. So as it works and starts crushing more and more of the vegetables and getting more and more of that brine expressed, I'm just going to add a little more. You don't want to run your stand mixer with the dough hook too long continuously. This is probably like a very, very stiff dough, and running it for too long could cause your motor some problems. So only on stir, only for short times. Shortish. It's really going down quite a bit. Softening up nicely. Even in the bowl itself, the brine is building up quite nicely. It's looking to me now like everything is pretty uniformly crushed up. So I'm going to call it there and unload this back into the bowl. And that's what we got. That nice beat up salty cabbage with a lot of brine forming underneath. So now as we return all of this to the bowl, we will see just how much it's shrunk. It was a mound well over the rim when we started, and then we salted it and waited 5 minutes, and then through various manual and mechanical ways, beat it down even further. I'm going to give it a few more crushes just to see if I can't squeeze anything else out. But it's feeling very uniformly soft, very broken down in the way that I wanted to. We can also have a taste in a sec to see how that's going along, to see if our instincts about the hotness of the peppers is right. Let's take a quick bite, then wash our hands and move on to packaging this. I mean, the primary flavor you're going to get right now is salt. It's salty in the brine. That will mellow out as more liquid dilutes it. Not getting much hot, but salt and crunch is most of it. Okay, so hand wash, and we'll move on to getting this into our fermentation container. I have lots of different fermentation crocks that have a water seal around them to prevent oxygen from getting in, which of course helps feed the bad bacteria and allows CO2 to get out, which is a product of fermentation, and which, if you let it build up, will possibly explode your jars or blow the lids off them. So I'm just using a big jar that I sterilized. You can use a common screw top lid. You have to be very careful with it, though, to let it burp and let off that CO2 frequently. I have what's called an easy fermenter lid. It looks like that, and it's an airlock. And it is a one-way airlock that lets CO2 out without letting oxygen in. So very, very handy to have. Easy to find, this or similar different kinds of airlocks that just convert to a standard jar, a standard wide mouth jar. Don't use a narrow mouth jar because it will be very, very hard to do what we have to do next, which is pack the pickle. So just try to be as clean as possible. You can use the canning funnel, and it fits into a jar and makes it just a little bit easier to get stuff in without getting it all over the rim and body of the jar. It looks pretty full right now, almost to the top, but again, with my pickle pounder, this is actually really great at tamping things down. You can see it reduces it by about half, and you can hear the flow of that brine starting to come out as well, which is a good sign because we want brine. We want the brine to fully submerge and cover all of the sauerkraut, because then again, we're not having exposure to air, and exposure to air is the number one thing we don't want. That's the number one cause of ferments going wrong. On that note of ferments going wrong, how do you tell? Well, you tell because it looks scary. If something doesn't look right, don't eat it. Throw it out. If it's moldy or slimy, especially if the mold is black or pink or a color like that, you probably want to just get rid of it. If in doubt, just play it safe. Sometimes you'll see on the tops of things there'll be what looks like white mold. It's actually white yeast, and you can scoop it off. Some people, I think, even mix it in, but it's not necessary to get rid of that or to be worried about it. It's really the funky colors, bad smells, bad textures. You want everything to be crisp and funky, but not wet and scary. What will happen is, as the cabbage ferments and the CO2 gets given off, if it doesn't escape, it just fills spaces in here and inflates everything. And the water will eventually overflow, or again, if you have this kind of lid, it could just create enough pressure to burst or crack your bottle. So having a good amount of headspace can be important there. I've left it with that much. What I'm going to do is take one of the nice looking cabbage leaves, not right from the outside, but from near the middle, or near the outside, but not right near it. Looks pretty clean, and I'm going to push that on top as a kind of lid just to keep everything in place. I ordinarily have a little glass weight that I'll put on top of that, but I don't know where they all are right now. I haven't used them in a while, and they seem to have gone missing. What I can do, though, and I think it will still fit here, is use something else. What I can use is a small jar that is a narrow mouth jar. You can see, again, I've sterilized it, and it will fit right in top there. I'm also going to put a little brine into here and on the counter, just to make sure that it doesn't float as much. And I'll put that on top of the cabbage, and then that's going to act, again, as a weight just to push everything down and make sure it's all submerging. So there we go. We've now got that on. I like to get it as tight as possible. It has a little date keeper ring here you can slide around. So today is the 16th, and I will know then that that's when I started this one. Also good to label things on your own, but this is good. This is almost certainly going to overflow, and we don't want that to happen, which makes it really important that we have a bowl to keep it in, to catch all of that. It will foam up, it will come out of the tip of the airlock and just foam over. Almost certainly going to happen. I can't see how it wouldn't with the water at that level. Yeah, it's gonna overflow. So we have that in place. I could always just have gone with a lower headroom, and that would have been fine as well. I like having the narrow top. Again, the narrower it is, the less exposure to oxygen, and that's good. When you get down lower, if you have a big chamber of oxygen in there, that's not great. It's not the worst thing, but trying to get things filled up to a good headspace is a good practice. That now can go into a cool place like a basement or garage, somewhere probably dark, out of direct sunlight, just because you don't want the direct sunlight to heat it up. And it can sit for 2 weeks. What I think is probably best to do is let it go for a couple of days, check in on it, see how it's going, seeing if any nasty stuff is forming. You'll probably want to, if you have a screw lid, you'll want to burp the jar, just pop it open, you'll hear gas escape, close it back up. Maybe taste it after 2 weeks, after 2 days, 5 days, 7 days. You want to keep a good eye on it. After about 2 weeks, I think it's probably good to go. But let's take a look at another one that I did make recently, and we can compare it to this one. So this is another batch of sauerkraut that I started on Friday. Today is Wednesday. And so it's been going for a while. This is not the first time I've tried to shoot this video. I tried to shoot it with this batch, and the results were so amateurish. My head was cut off from about here. Just terrible. So I knew I had to try to make it again. So we have this batch, though. It's been going for 5 days. Starting to smell funky. If you tap the bottle, air bubbles come up. That's the CO2. And I will see, this is the glass weight I was telling you about that I'm replicating with this one with the jar. I'll just dig under and see if I can get a little bit of the kraut. Oh yeah, this was all foamed over. The bowl was pretty full. There was foam in the top. I think that will be like that tomorrow or the day after. And so we have 2 to go on, and we will check in and see how they're doing in a little while and give you some updates. All right, have a good one. It's been almost a week since we put this kraut into a jar, and you will see the difference. This was the one that I made before, but this is the one that we saw me making earlier. And you can see, you can actually hear, let me move my mic down, and you can hear it, how much it's fizzing. It's just chirping nonstop. And it has overflowed as well. You can see there's foam all around the top. There's a lot of brine in the bottom of the bowl, and it's just chirping and making these ticking noises almost. The older ferment seems to have calmed down. There isn't any really water in the bottom, maybe a little, but it's not making any noise. When I shake it, a little bit of CO2 comes out, but not a lot. So let's open this one now and just see how it's doing. Give it a smell. Yeah, you can smell there is that fresh, green, grassy kind of smell. I'm going to give it a little. You can see all of those bubbles escaping as we force some of that carbon dioxide out, and that will, the level will go down. So there is still a lot of CO2 trapped in there, but it's not as actively fermenting anymore. This one started on the 11th, and it's the 22nd today. So 11 days out. There's probably only needs a day or 2 more to sit, and then we can put it in a jar in the fridge, stop the fermentation. That's about as much as you're going to get. You could, of course, let it go longer, but 2 weeks I find is kind of the happy spot for ferments. And now you can see the other one, all the foam that's collected around the top, so we're just going to loosen that. Try not to make too much of a mess. Gently pour that off. Just put it there for now, it'll be fine. And you can see, yes, how that's really come up. Again, I'm going to tamp down. And you can watch all of that carbonation rush out. And again, the water line goes down a little bit. Not a whole lot, but it's not overflowing anymore. Just tamp it down a little more. You can definitely hear gas rushing out. There is a lot of it in there. It's a few hours later, and I just checked my footage and realized that I hadn't actually shot tasting it. I thought I did, but I shot me futzing around the camera. So here we are. Once again, I'd broken everything down. I had to set everything back up again. We have the first kraut that I made that wasn't filmed, and then the one that we saw earlier in this video being made. I'm just going to taste them both. This one is about 11 days old. Starting to get that lactic flavor. Still quite crunchy. I'm surprised after almost 2 weeks that it is as crunchy as it is. It's good, it's bright. Really starting to get that sour kosher pickle flavor of the lactic acid coming through. And then this is the younger batch. This is just 6 days old. Much more crunchy, still very crunchy. We're just starting to get into that lactic flavor. Still quite bright, still quite salty. This one, the salt has mellowed a bit as more and more liquid has come out. This one, when I brought it up again to have a go at it, this time was still hissing. So it is a very, very active ferment right now. So I'm going to seal these back up, tamp them down, make sure they're below the water level, and then we'll check in again on them later, maybe in a few days. And hopefully this one will be able to be jarred. And then shortly after that, this one will be able to be jarred. So we'll see you then. I mixed up 200 grams of water with 4.3 grams of salt and had it dissolved. So that's 2.3%. And I'm just going to use some of that to top up each of these. Just a little more so I can see that everything is nice and covered before we put everything back. I had a taste, everything's coming along well. So I think these just need a couple more days, then we can think about taking them out and putting them into jars, putting them into the fridge as the final product. So weights go back on, and now we've got a good coverage there. Because this is just filled with brine, I'm gonna take this lid off, that's kind of the problem. This is full of the same brine, so it really doesn't matter. And now it slides in and sits nicely. So we'll cap that. And in a few days, we will be ready to jar. We'll see you then. Well, I'm back. I said it was going to be just a few days, and it turns out it was more like 10. I could tell you I got busy or something, but I didn't. I just kind of didn't do it. So we're doing it now. We are ready to jar these. So we have our older of the two krauts that has the glass weight on it. Give this a taste. That is definitely ready to go. It's fully fermented. It tastes very lactic-y, still quite salty, but it's got that funk that you're looking for, exactly what we're looking for. This is the younger of the two that has the glass jar in it. This one has the hotter peppers, so we'll see what that's like. Get underneath the cabbage. Definitely hotter, also fully ready. So we will lift the cabbage leaves that we're holding everything down out of here and then get these into jars. So we have our 2 jars of hot kraut, 2 jars of milder kraut. The first jar will always get more brine in it than the second jar, so you might want to just even pour a little in. It's not that important, but you know, even out the brine for each. The same, this one's quite briny. And make sure your jars are all nice and clean. These are going in the fridge, so they don't need to be, you know, they need to be clean, but they don't need to be as sanitized and sterile like for surgery as they did when we were making the fermentation. When they go into the fridge, they will still continue to ferment, but very, very slowly, not at the rate that they do at room temperature. So it's almost like they won't ferment, and you can keep them for a long time. So there's not as much concern about bacterial growth, thus you don't really need to worry about having your brine all the way up. It's not a bad thing to do, but it's not necessary. or to have absolutely sterile jars. And that's it. We are ready to go into the fridge. But first I gotta make space for it. And we will see you in the next video. Bye. Okay, questions you may be asking yourselves. First, did I finish this video without actually giving a good taste to what I'd made? Maybe, but we're gonna rectify that now. I've got here a terrific looking Farm Boy kosher beef hot dog on a banh mi roll. I've got some authentic stadium mustard, as well as the kraut that we made. Next question, did the kraut, when I opened it, open with a bang that sounded like a bomb going off? Yes, I did. Like I said, you really got to burp your stuff, even apparently if it's in the fridge. And third, did the stadium mustard kind of come out all gloppy and watery? Yes, it did. You really got to shake stadium mustard well. So let's give this a try. It's on a banh mi roll, so I didn't steam it. Ordinarily, I would steam a hot dog bun. I like it that way, but with a banh mi roll, it's got to be flaky, and I think that sort of goes against it. So let's give this a try. Question 3. Did my tripod break just before I was setting this up? Yes, it did. So new tripod is necessary. That's great. The funk of the sauerkraut is right where I want it. It plays well with the mustard, of course, and the hot dog. Big thumbs up. See you in the next video.